I would say that the Gaokao itself, I think on the surface level, it looks drastically different in that there's social distancing, which is experienced across the world. But I think the biggest difference is probably invisible to most non-test takers, which is the preparation time. And here, I think that families that already had access to the best high schools and the best preparation beforehand, they definitely probably transitioned to online education very smoothly. And there, I think, among the policy in the scholarly world, there's more concern for those who had less access, for instance, a connection to high-speed internet, and how they fared and how their preparation would really suffer from last year and their performance this year.
That's a really good distinction. Talk to us a little bit more about that digital divide, because I guess if you're from a poor region, you don't have access, it can be a tremendous disadvantage, couldn't it, compared to years past?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that is very commendable about the Chinese Gaokao system is that the public system, the public high schools, especially in the last year of study, really dedicated itself to preparing students for the Gaokao, unlike other systems, like notably the U.S., for instance. And there, I think the quality, and it's not even just how students have access to online or even a quiet space to study in at home, but also how their schools and teachers transition to online teaching. I can imagine that the elite high schools, the international high schools in areas like Shanghai and Beijing, that the teachers, not to say that they didn't struggle, but that they probably transitioned online much more easily than teachers who probably weren't in the habit of using the internet themselves beforehand, right? Like in the inland provinces. So it's not even just access at home for students, but then how they actually access teaching online from their schools.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of professors who say it took a while to get their footings. I mean, they're normally in their classroom, they're interacting, so that's also kind of a difficulty, I would think. But let me ask you about this being such a major milestone for these young people. It induces such a tremendous amount of anxiety. We've done a lot of stories about this every year. That's without a pandemic. So talk to us about the Gaokao in the time of coronavirus, because there is so much at stake for these students.
So here, I think you and I can only imagine the amount of stress that students and their families are experiencing. I think right now, as Chinese students transitioned online earlier this year, I'm sure that Gaokao takers, their immediate thought was just incredible stress about how they would the Gaokao be offered in person? Would it be offered at all? All of their 11 years of preparation, where would it go? And I imagine that in the past few months, families and students have had access to really nice resources. I know that many students also pay for outside tutoring services, that they probably got the help that they needed, and I would imagine that they experienced some sort of stress, right, just because everything looks different. But again, I think that the inequality of those who know that they're not as well prepared as they could have been because of the transition of the pandemic, here, my greatest sympathies are for them and their families, where it really is this unpredictability in how they think they probably will do.
So talk to me about, is there any sort of recourse? I mean, if you're a student and you were like really gearing up for this and then the whole world collapses, 6 months of having to try and do this online, you don't have access, as we talked about, this digital divide, what's your recourse, or is there one?
So here, I think that this is where I think in the policy world and universities actually can have a lot of power to determine how they'll use the Gaokao. So in the past decade, really, China has, and universities have become less stringent about how they've relied on the Gaokao, where in past years and decades, it used to be one cutoff, your one chance a year, and now in many cases, there are different kinds of exceptions, right? So I think that universities here, I would implore them to be at least a little bit understanding about how they look at scores, and not just average scores, because I imagine that maybe in some cases that students may actually even do better than they normally would have because they've had dedicated quiet time at home. But that they pay particular attention to, for instance, outer province applicants that already were contingent on had not the best preparation to get into those universities, and to keep an eye on equity, not just the cutoff score.